Good morning, All Souls Community Church. It's Tuesday, September the 8th, and this week we're talking all about faith. What does faith look like, especially juxtaposed to fear, which is oftentimes what spills out of us when we bump up against things that are too big for us, giants. And this past Sunday, we looked specifically at the story of Numbers 13, where God's people are looking at the promised land, this land that God has promised to give to them. They're on the shores of the Jordan, in the plains of Moab, looking west and dreaming. And they send in these 12 spies for 40 days to check out the land. And they bring back the report that everything is enormous. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. The problem is the people are enormous too. They are literally giants, and there is no possible way that we are going to be able to overcome them, and they're right. On their own, they were never going to be able to overcome them. What was the point we looked at on Sunday? But that God specifically and intentionally puts us in situations where we have to exercise faith, which is what again? Faith is looking backwards in order to move forward. Is looking backwards to what God has said and what God has done in order that we might move forward, because we can say, God has said it, God has done it, therefore I can. I can, in other words, because God will. And so faith is looking back in order to move forward. And one of the stories that God's people should have looked back on when they were in that position in Numbers 13 was something that happened all the way back in Exodus 14, when they were first being taken out of slavery in Egypt and going into the wilderness. It said that God brought his people to the edge of the Red Sea. And as they're there and there's this vast ocean in front of them, another huge obstacle, right, that they cannot move, they turn back and what do they see? But the Egyptians are pursuing them. It says that the people, they didn't give in to faith, they gave in to fear. They started to rebel and to cry out and say, why have you brought us out into the wilderness that we might die? And what I want you to see here is two things. First, that what first saves God's people is that the angel of the Lord, this pre-incarnate Jesus, who's been leading them as a pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day, literally moves from in front of this nation of people and goes behind them. God himself protects his people by laying down his life for them, so that the Egyptians are in a state of confusion. They can't get through this great glory cloud. God literally uses his own body to save his people. Talk about foreshadowing of what Jesus was going to do, right? But in addition, the second point that I think is important for us to ponder this morning, because it gives us a nuance into understanding this whole idea of choosing to live by faith rather than fear, is you see play out in this story that God uses actually the Red Sea. It says Moses parts the Red Sea. He puts his staff over the water. God says, do that, and I'm going to part the Red Sea so that my people will pass through on dry land. So God splits open this obstacle, right? But God uses the obstacle. God promises it through Moses at that very moment. He says this, listen, fear not, stand firm and see that the Lord is going to work this salvation for you today. You see those Egyptians that you see, you're never going to see them again, because the Lord is going to fight for you, and you only have to be silent. All you got to do is choose to trust, right? Be silent and look. Fear not, stand firm and see. And what happens? The next day they get up, they pass through the Red Sea on dry land, and God uses the very thing that was one of their obstacles, one of the giants that they could not push through, to actually work their salvation for them. Because as the Egyptians try to come through, it says that the walls of the Red Sea come crashing down on them. What's the point here? The point is simply this. So often in our lives, we find ourselves up against the Red Sea, right? Up against an immovable object that's causing us great fear. And we turn around and we see that there's another immovable object. There's another giant that's pursuing us, like the Egyptians were for the Israelites. And what do we often pray? Just like the Israelites in that day, where we get mad at God, right? But then we also pray, just remove the obstacles. Please just remove the obstacles. And what God wants us to see is that oftentimes his answer to that question is going to be no. Because God's not in the business of simply removing obstacles from our lives. What God's in the business of is using those obstacles to save us, to reunite us with himself, to bring us to the end of ourselves where we realize, I really can't do this life on my own. I really can't figure this out. I really can't shoulder this weight. And what I need is you. And when we turn to God in those moments, what we see is a God who from the beginning is saying, I will. I will. I know you. I will. Simply trust me. Look back to what I've said and what I've done, that you might move forward, believing that God will, therefore I can. And so here's maybe an encouragement for us this Tuesday. As we're entering into, thankfully, a short week right after Labor Day, here's some encouragement. Instead of simply praying, God, will you please remove this obstacle? In addition to praying that, because there's nothing wrong with praying that, in addition to praying that, will you add this portion to the end of your prayer? Will you say, God, but if you won't, will you open my eyes to see how you're going to use it? You're going to use this obstacle to save me, to shape me, to mold me, to love me, and then to use me in the lives of others who need to hear about this very faithful God as well. Do you hear what I'm asking you to do? I'm going to be doing it as well for you. Not simply praying for the obstacles to be removed, the big giants in our lives, but to pray in addition, God, I can't really see right now how this could possibly work out for good, how you could be at work in this, how you could use this. So open my eyes to see it, that I might walk by faith. For too often, friends, we're waiting for God to bring us around the obstacle or to move it out of the way, when what God is doing, when what Jesus is doing, is leading us through the Red Sea, through the valley of the shadow of death, through our giants, that we might actually know victory. What is the victory that he wants for you today? And what giants is he going to use to bring you there? My prayer is that God gives us the eyes to see and the faith to keep walking. God be with you, my friends, this Tuesday.